If we looked and saw that people were ending up in jail and incarcerated because of inability to pay and because of poverty, we thought we have to solve that earlier. Promise is, if you have government debt, we want you to keep the service and pay in a timeline that makes sense for you, and it's interest free.
Welcome to Come Back with Erica Cobb, a community of folks like yourselves who are getting ready and staying ready for their next chapter. Well, my guest today is an amazing American social justice advocate and businesswoman, the co-founder and CEO of Promise, a technology platform that helps people pay their government debt. She is also most notably known as being the manager of the late icon Prince Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins. Welcome to Come Back with Erica Cobb.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And in the interest of transparency, I've done some research. I've seen a lot of your talks, and there was one that really stood out to me in particular. And you were talking on motherhood and leadership. And I thought it was just a great way to kind of introduce you to my comeback community. Part of the reason why I think it's such a great way is because you really unveiled the sentiments behind growing up low resourced, growing up with perhaps less vision or less amplification of your voice in your community than a lot of other people. And I really felt like that was a great way to kind of bring that in. So how do you describe growing up?
I think I was really lucky, though at the time it didn't feel that way. And my mom was a waitress and who went back to school. And I grew up without a lot. And I think my mom was trying to figure out what was the best environment and how to be a mom. But it made me believe very deeply in a sense of justice. And I think only when you're treated without dignity, sometimes do you understand and have a deep need and want it for other people. And so for me, I think a lot about the pride that came from getting off of food stamps, or for me, when I was a kid, we had the free lunch line, right? That's how I always thought about it. It's like, it was made in a way that didn't always give you dignity. Because like, if you had free lunch, you were in a different line than everyone else who paid for lunch or who brought a lunch. And so when my mom got a better job and we had to pay 40 cents, like we went on reduced lunch to be in line with everyone else. And so what it made clear to me is that the way that our systems work sometimes shame people. And I want to build a world where kids don't feel shame and don't feel like they've done something or that they're broken or something is wrong. And so I'm grateful that it helped me understand how and why dignity is so critical and why shame is so harmful.
Well, let's talk about shame, because I'm going to quote you. You said, if we aspire to be a movement for real change, we have to acknowledge the shame we carry. And more than the shame we carry, we have to see it in other people. So when we relate to them in change, we don't diminish who they are. And first of all, brilliant. But it also really went into some of the stories that you told, because if someone comes up with more resources or they're not in a marginalized community, it's very common and very easy for them to look at the quote other and say, this is who they are based on the circumstances I'm seeing them in. And you had a very interesting story about using food stamps to purchase pickles. And it's something that a lot of people never would have thought about. So can you share that story?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's so interesting about growing up without resources is I think there's a lot of judgment, right? And so people look at you and say, what are you using food stamps for? And I think I hear this discussion a lot about people who are struggling, which is like, how are they spending their money? What are they spending it on? How many kids do they have? And there is this inherent sense for many people that for people who are economically struggling, that they deserve judgment. And I think what, both my faith would tell me, and I think my own experience would say, is that some of those honorable humans I ever met were struggling economically. Some of they are the people who are most likely to donate, the people who are most likely to participate in church, the people most likely to volunteer for their children's school. And so I felt a lot of shame because I was clear I was different. I was lucky. I was in like these gifted smart kids programs, always the only Black child, always the only poor child. And so I think we have a responsibility to recognize that people are there because the structures of our systems keep people there, right? The wages that we pay them, the lack of access to affordable housing. And if we realize that it's our people, right, as Black people, it is our folks are in places that don't really create opportunity for them, then we have to recognize that that's us, right? Even if we get like, I am now lucky, I now live a different economic life, but I'm clear, but for the grace of God, right there go I. And it's just because I was lucky and people create opportunity. And so I just think that we have a real responsibility to recognize that the economic systems are not built for our folks, but we at least can immediately solve for the lack of dignity and the intense shame as though we did something wrong because we don't have money. And that's just fundamentally unjust.
I think when you say luck, people always, have some type of feeling about that, especially when we're talking about moving up the socioeconomic ladder. For myself, I'm one generation removed from poverty. So my father, was born in a one-room shack with no floors, no electricity. And it was a situation where he used a lot of different opportunities, such as at that time, it was the military, to get out of the situation that he was in, and then utilize, the GI in order to, go to school. And then all of a sudden, years later, he is a middle class man with my mother who had a kind of similar situation. So when I look at their journey, I'm always looking at it, connecting the dots, because I didn't have to experience that. So how do I take that baton and move it up for the next generation after me? So what I always see is there were choices. There were fundamental times and decisions that a choice was made to go to the next step. And those things are always risks. So when I think about opportunities, meeting preparation, and then we add the luck factor to it, I just have to acknowledge that, because I do think that luck has a lot to do with it, but you were prepared for those opportunities at the most pivotal times.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you?
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I'm just curious, in hindsight, what did you see in those pivotal times that created that opportunity for you to walk into?
It's such a great question. And I think what did I see? I think when you're doing it, like, I don't know that I even feel successful today. So because I think you look around you and you think, oh, like I could have done, I think I always think like, okay, I got to 70%, but I really want to get to 100. I didn't get enough people. I didn't do that. So one thing is, I don't know that I feel successful, like as much as, or I feel like I have achieved sometimes. I think there are moments when I believe in magic. And so I believe anything is possible, which I think is different. And I do think part of luck is that my life has affirmed that belief. And I think for a lot of people, life hasn't affirmed that belief.
Mm.
And so I believed that, like, I thought I could work with this human, or I could do this, or I could learn this, and then life would affirm that. And so I think for me, I went to school, I worked, in college, and then weird thing, I was like, I'm gonna go work out. And then I ended up working out with Richard Simmons, and I ended up on a video. And so but what are the chances? I went to Cal State Northridge. I happened to go to a gym, and then Richard Simmons was there, and then I did a video. So I feel like it isn't that I knew, like, planned it, had a theory of how to do it. And then I have a friend and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be in music. Oh, I get introduced to Prince, or I'm starting a company and we raised $50 million. And so I definitely think some of it is, like just working hard, believing in magic. But I also think I happened to sometimes be in the right places, and I believed it was possible. And I didn't have kids I had to go home to. Wasn't economically responsible for other people. And I did study and I was interested, but I really do believe it is as much about preparation as it is about fate, grace, or luck.
Mm. You call it magic. I'm just hearing the ancestors. It's like just being
Right? Don't
obedient.
you?
Yeah.
Yes. But I swear, I feel like one is I only care so much about what my Nana believed. Like, okay, as long as I don't embarrass her, like never been more happy than to be in Jet magazine. So I was like, she can take it to the beauty shop and to church and she'll so I think those are the folks who laid the framework for us to succeed and frankly gave us the love. So if other people did it, I was like, okay, well, my Nana's still good with me.
Right, right, exactly. And I mean, we have to just realize what it is that really matters. And that's your Nana, my big mama.
Yeah.
They got they got us. They got us.
That is right. And that is part of it to me is like, as you think about luck or experience, like we had love that affirmed us, even if it wasn't perfect, it affirmed us. And that is, I feel like we're lucky to have that.
Yes, absolutely. Comeback community, you're listening to Comeback with Erica Cobb. I am speaking with Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins, who is the co-founder and CEO of Promise. Now, let's talk about Promise because obviously that's why you're here, because we need to let the people know. This is your initiative. How exactly does it work?
Yeah. So the easiest way to think about what we do is if you have money, you can buy a Peloton interest free and you get the Peloton now and you pay later.
Right.
But for people who have debt, who owe the government money, you might owe child support, a parking ticket, a water bill. Usually we say, if you don't pay now, you lose the service.
Right.
So Promise is if you have government debt, we want you to keep the service and pay at a timeline that makes sense for you. And it's interest free. Because our belief is people actually don't want their water shut off. They don't want to lose their driver's license. So if you give them the same type of payment resources we give people who have money, then people will pay it back. So we help people do interest-free installment plans to pay back government debt. And then we also help people get aid out as quickly as possible. So how do you, instead of having to provide taxes and a lot of things that kind of make it difficult to get aid, we send you a text message, you answer 3 questions, and aid is immediately given to you. And so we're trying to make sure that government works as effectively as possible for people who don't have money instead of just working for people who do.
I think regardless of, well, not regardless of whatever financial situation you're coming from, because obviously if you are an affluent person, this isn't something you are considering. However, for those of us who have been through many phases of economic situations, I remember when my bank accounts were seized because obviously I went through a divorce, bankruptcy, and unemployment all at the same time. So it was a financial hardship time for me. And I kept thinking it was so ironic that at the time when I needed to just be able to survive the most, that the government actually came in and seized all of my bank accounts and I wasn't able to do anything. So it's a domino effect at that point. Then it's like the lights, then it's the rent, then it's, the repossession of your vehicle. And now the only way that I had to make money, I can't even make the money because I don't have the resources to even go to make the money. So this resonates with so many people on so many levels.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing because I think most people have had that experience. And so we have to create better opportunities for people. And what we see is the kind of old school traditional payment system that still exists in government assumes that everyone makes the same amount of money, their conditions never change, and per month you can pay it on the same date. And that's just not the reality. So like what we see is a lot of people who are crisis paying their bills, right? So they're paying every bill right before it gets shut off. And they're paying that way because they don't have enough money, not because they don't want to pay. And
Right.
if we believe that people would pay their bills, then we should structure them in a way that they can make them. And we do that in the private sector. They do that a lot for people who have money. Buy now, get it now, pay for it later. But if you're poor, the government, if you're not our clients don't do this, thankfully, the government clients we have, but they say, okay, prove you're poor. Send us your taxes and come down to the office. And then we'll make a decision and we'll charge you interest and you might not get your service. And so, and that's just a broken way to run a government.
Right. Right. I mean, to say the least.
Right.
Not only broken, it feels very predatory as well. Because obviously, yes.
I just have to give you one example. So one large city in California, as an example, we're figuring out with them right now, the way their contract works with this is a ticketing, right? Parking or traffic. And the company works, if you pay on time, let's say they get $1. If you pay late, they get $7. Mm-hmm. If you go into collections, then they get 40% of it. So the company has no incentive to make it any easier for people to pay. And in fact, when we started working with them, they said, well, we don't want to lose, we don't want you to impact our revenue. And we just thought, how broken is that a company is incentivized for people to not pay, which means that will get attached to their registration. They would lose their driver's license. But the structure of these contracts is set up for the individual to fail.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Make no mistake about it. That's one of the things when I talked about the evolution or moving through different types of socioeconomic systems. Like there are times I just said last week, I'm like, if I would have had this type of assistance or this type of people wanting to help me when I needed it the most, I wouldn't have a comeback because I never would have had like a setback, like it's crazy to think about. But at the same time, people like yourselves, your platform, Promise, are so important in order to combat the situation. So I understand this has been an evolution for the platform. So how is it different from when it first began?
Yeah, when it first began, we were very focused on the criminal justice system. And what we were trying to understand is how to scale bail reform. So our first product was basically a personal assistant so that people would show up for court. And we realized two things. One is we didn't like our clients and not people on the system, but you only could sell to sheriffs. Like most of what we were doing was selling. And we realized the more efficiencies we created for them, even in a good product, could potentially be harmful. And again, incentives were off because if I'm a sheriff, I get paid per person per day who's in jail. So I get less money when less people are in jail. So it's only if I have a certain value set, but most people are incentivized to actually get more and more people in their local jails. And so we said, we can't sell a product in which the folks are incentivized and they have different incentives than ours. Because our incentive was like, people shouldn't be in jail because they're broke. We can't criminalize poverty.
Right.
And so we thought a lot about what to do. And what we realized is there's something called the failure to appear rate, which is the people kind of like who's most likely to show up for court, what percentage. And the people in this county we happen to be at the time, the people most likely to not show up for court were people with a suspended driver's license. And so they were seen as the highest risk. And so when we looked at who that was, we saw mamas who hadn't been able to pay parking tickets. We saw people who were driving on a suspended driver's license because they had to go to work, because they had other debts to pay. And so if we looked and saw that people were ending up in jail and incarcerated because of inability to pay and because of poverty, we thought we have to solve that earlier on, right? That the goal should be to help people solve the debt. And so we went to the city of Oakland and, we were like, okay, we want to help you solve this problem. Because at the time, if you owed money, you couldn't put yourself on a payment plan until you owed at least $500, which means you had to let the fines increase. Right. And then you had to come into the office to apply for a payment plan. You had to bring taxes to prove you deserved to pay it back. And you had interest. So it's like, I got to wait till I'm broke, take a day off, pay you extra fees and fines. And if I don't pay you, there's a whole team of people who are going to take you to court if you didn't pay. Right. And so we said, hey, seems like everyone with money has it easier to pay nowadays. Why are we going to make it so difficult for poor people?
Right.
And they basically said, no, thank you. And we said, oh, okay. So then we decided to do it anyway. And so in the beginning, we took risks. We actually just paid people's parking tickets. And what we found is 93% of people paid us back.
Wow.
And so we did it in Oakland, we did it in Philadelphia, we did it in Denver. So that's how we ended up doing it. At first, we couldn't convince governments to say, if you don't charge interest, if you make it easy, if you make it flexible, we think more people will pay you back. And at the time, people were like, no way. Now we know it's true. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the company started, is we were just like, we can't wait until people are in the criminal justice system and when they're only there because they couldn't afford something.
93% payback rate is, I expected it to be high just based on where the story was going, because come on. But I didn't expect it to be 93%, but it makes a lot of sense because, when you're in a situation where you are in poverty or under-resourced in that moment, there is a pride. Like, I remember like being able to check things off to be like, ooh, yep, got that. Like, yeah, there was an excitement and enthusiasm about feeling like I was coming from underneath being like drowned in the water. But also I think about all of the reasons why, when you get talked about, single mothers and, people in all of these different situations who have parking tickets they can't pay. But also this can be a population that don't necessarily have permanent residency. So if you're getting a notice in the mail about a $25 ticket, by the time you find out about it, that ticket could be $300. And now it's like, well, if it was $25, I would have just paid it. But it's the way that the system is set up, or has been set up in a lot of capacities, to ensure that, oh, okay, well, we're going to send out this ticket, especially when everything was snail mail. And a lot of places it still is, that's predatory. We just don't refer to it that way because it's the government. Like,
it is. And I think, and this is where I think as Black people and people of color and people faith, or however we arrive at these things, the thing that we should realize is that it's the government's technology being punitive for people who don't need punishment. And so the way the system is built is it is a consequence based instead of an incentive based. And the thing is, like everywhere else in life, we're like, oh, carrots for our children. It's not all about punishment. It's like we need to make it as easy as possible. But for poor people, we say, if you don't pay a bill by the 15th, you have a late fee immediately. Then if you don't pay the late fee, you lose your car. Then you're going to get towed. And if you go into towing, it's all over, right? And so our belief is, if you treat people with dignity, shockingly, they don't want to go to jail, don't want to lose their driver's license, don't want to not have water, don't want to not have power. And so if you believe that people are people with dignity, which we do, it is shocking to some people, but it's ridiculous to us. And that's why 93% of people pay us back, because we are rooting for their success and we are building software that assumes they want to pay. And it is our experience that they do want to pay. And so we do things like send people reminders. And we also give people flexibility. People for 2 weeks, they cannot pay. We don't even care. They can automatically do it and say, I need 2 more weeks. Because why would they make them talk to someone to so you can do that in our technology. You can say, I need a 2-week extension. Every human gets it. And so, and you know what? 80% of people, if you give them the 2 weeks, pay immediately. And so, it's just using data to build systems that treat people with respect and assume that they don't need punishment to pay their water bill.
So let's talk about the technology and the building of the platform, because I'm always curious anytime I have a guest who is bringing a tremendous resource to the community, like, how did this start? And I've heard I was in the shower, and I came up with this idea. So what was the true genesis that got the ball rolling on all of this? And how did it get into the tech sphere?
Yeah. So I had been in music, and I was struck by the fact that there was all these, I should say, I was in the labor movement. Technology was awful. And I was in San Jose at the time. All these tech companies were coming up, and all we saw, I was in unions, was people getting worse off. Like all of a sudden, janitors who used to have jobs at tech companies were outsourced, undocumented women having to work 4 jobs or 2 jobs, during the week, living in garages. So it was like the growth of tech was not great. And then I was in a nonprofit, and I was like, oh, again, this whole tech thing, not working out for our people. And then I was in music, and all these amazing musicians, their content was being devalued by technology. And the nature of the way that technology was owned, like labels owned part of streaming services. So it used to be you had a 50-50 split. All of a sudden the split was different. So, and all these artists of color, all of a sudden their content was worth less. So I was like, this tech seems to not be good for everyone. And so I went to work at a tech company, and it was a 2-sided marketplace, which is, basically it was getting people home care. And I was interested that in a lot of technology, there's just not options. It's like pay people less, charge more. And so when I started Promise, I wanted there to be a company that when the company did better, our people did better. And what I saw a lot is like, if Uber does good, it means prices are up and people are getting paid less. And so it seemed as though we should have a company in which when the company did well, the people who relied on the service did well. And my belief was I'd run revenue at the company I was at before, and I would be in this room and I was like, all these people started companies for things they cared about. Oh, dog walking. I need a dog walking software. Oh, pick up my dog, my wash, my clothes. Get me a cab after I get out of the club at night. Right. Do this. And I was like, these are their problems. And I was like, these are not our folks' problems. And so that was really my belief was less about this specific and more about we need to build a company that when it does well, the people who rely on it do well. And that was just my belief. And because I didn't have models for it, I just was like, and I'd ask people and they'd say, oh, Ben and Jerry's ice cream. And I was like, is that our best model for when a company does well? So that was really, it was less about the specific idea and more about the commitment that when the company was successful, like if you believe capitalism is here, we wanted a model that said, when the company does better, the people who rely on the service do better.
So let's talk about it from both ends in terms of how my community can become involved. First, is there a way to support Promise?
Yeah. So one, we've raised a lot of capital, so we don't need capital. And I'm incredibly grateful to be a Black entrepreneur and say that. What we need is one, we want to grow. So we need people to know about it because we want more communities to have access to this. And the number one thing we hear is that argument of kind of punitive. Like I had a conversation with someone in a large city at a parking thing, and he said, I want to be able to boot people the day after they miss a payment. And I just was like, so that doesn't even make economic sense. You're going to get less money. It's not great. So I think from a community perspective, being able to make the case for Promise, but also the idea that it is not punitive based, I think is probably the thing that would be most important. And then we just want people to know that they have these opportunities. We're in places like Louisville, Milwaukee, we're in Buffalo, New York. We really are across the country. And we want in those places people to know you don't need to get your water shut off.
So on the other side, for people who are in need and under-resourced in the moment, what's the best way for them to, kind of seek some assistance for themselves?
Our website is joinpromise.com, just JOINPROMISE, and any human can reach out and there is an ask for help. And so we will find out if we have a relationship there. We always reach out to folks. We respond to every person that reaches out to us because we have, even if we haven't all been there, some of our team has, some or haven't, we know how hard it is. And all you need is to be met with grace in that moment.
Joinpromise.com. So this is for anyone who is finding themselves under-resourced in the moment, needs to get some type of financial assistance for a payment plan that fits their needs and their budget and their schedule.
Yes, it's important though that it's in places we have a relationship with the government, because what we're saying to the government is, hey, we're going to guarantee you, let's say 40% of people sign up and we'll give you 93% of revenue, but we want them to have nothing shut off. Like we work with the governments and we work with child support, we work with parking, traffic, water, electric. And so we have the criminal justice system. And so we have a pretty wide variety of clients where people can get access to support.
So on the government end, because you are looking to expand, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, how do we, as people who might have more of a relationship with people in the government or people who might have more influence, how do we lobby or advocate for Promise to expand?
One, I'm so grateful, and that's my favorite question, because I believe the more we can free people, the better off we are. The most important thing is to be able to tell the government that there is a way to get interest-free payment plans and not shut off people's water or something else, that they actually make more money. So there's two types of people we've discovered in government. One, people who philosophically say, oh, we should treat people better. The other is people who say, I want more money. And what we can say to people is you actually make more money when you allow people to pay it off. Because if you don't, you're going to shut them off. You're going to send them to collections and it doesn't even make monetary sense for you. And so those are the two ways, ethical or money, and different of our clients make decisions. But the most important thing they can say is, this is, we think, how government should should do it, and then to connect us.
Perfect. Well, if you're out there and you know people who know people who know people, we need your help. Okay.
No, we do.
I mean, everyone, even if you haven't personally been in a situation where you are unable to pay your bills, especially the super important ones like keeping a roof over your head and having, water and electricity, you know someone who has. And obviously there are situations, because a lot of people out there robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that's a game that like eventually can come to a complete halt on all fronts. So if we're able to help out our people, help out our community to ensure that they're just met with dignity when they have when they have something going on, if something's happening and they lost their job or whatever the situation may be, that there's a way with dignity that we can approach this. So yes, I'm so glad that you came on today. Comeback community, you're listening to Comeback with Erica Cobb. We are speaking with Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins, who is the co-founder and CEO of Promise. I will have more information on Promise on my website. But Phaedra, before I let you go, first I want to ask you, what was the legacy of Prince in terms of your motivation for doing what you're doing today?
I think one is anytime, I don't think I was prepared for the loss. And I don't think, and I think I'm not someone who speaks a lot publicly about him. And so I think for me, it was, I want to do things that would make him proud. And I think those of us who know him know how radical he was. So whether it was pulling down his Twitter because of what had happened in the Black Lives Matter movement or fighting for artists to have rights, he believed in magic. He believed in bending his will in a way I've never seen any other human do. And I think he believed in so many of us. Like I never had someone I would be like, oh my gosh, someone is so mean to me. What do I do? And they don't like me. I was like definitely not a loved person sometimes because I had to do some stuff that was really important for him. And he would just be like, you're Mayweather. You got to get out there. Like it's like a one person hype crew. And so for me, I hope that his legacy is the lessons and the people he invested in do things that would make him proud. And we act in ways in which even if he were not here, he would feel like we're appropriate, that we're important to the Black community, and that he definitely believed in our own systems. And so a lot of times I think like, I'm building our tech. I'm making sure, our folks are treated with respect and dignity. And so I hope that what I'm doing would make him proud. And I feel confident that if I were to be in a room with him, I could say with really full commitment that the best way I thought to honor you was to do the things that you told us were important to do.
I first of all, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your transparency on that. It's interesting to me that, Prince was obviously such an icon, and especially as an artist. But when I think of Prince, the first thing I think of is how he taught us the importance of ownership. And
speak on that. Speak on that.
I mean, that's always my first thought. And I'm a huge Prince fan, in terms of the music, the artist, but I always think about that. Like he really made it resonate to me, the importance of ownership. And that's something I am forever grateful for.
I think that is so right. And I think I don't think the innovation he had gets recognized enough, even as a business person. And so he had a music club before people knew what it was. He wanted to have a streaming service. Like he put CDs so that it would count for the selling. Like so much, I think of what you look at folks like Jay-Z and others, I think the foundation was laid by Prince. And so I think I think the ownership part is key. And I think if he were picking one thing, I think he would be grateful to be recognized and appreciated for that.
Well, Phaedra, before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to share with our comeback community? Because everybody's taking notes on the sage advice of our testimony teachers, like our experts. I just feel so blessed to have this platform where I get to speak with people like you who are creating real change in our communities, representing us so well. So the floor is yours.
I actually just have real gratitude for you and what you're doing. I just think this stuff is hard some days, and most days I feel like I'm failing, not winning. And so I just really appreciate being in a space where the focus is on how do we uplift and how do we create opportunity. And so I'm just sitting in gratitude.
Ah, girl, thank you so much. Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins. For more on her, my comeback community, I know y'all were listening. You're taking it all in. Communicate with us as well. Let us know your thoughts. If you are in need of resource, go to my online home, comeback.tv, where more information is provided on Phaedra as well as the Promise platform, because we want to make sure we're amplifying this message. Phaedra, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us on Come Back with Erica Cobb.
I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.